The Yadaran cadets laughed and pointed their scaly, clawed reptilian fingers at the holographic image of humanity's ancient fossil-fueled M1 Abrams tank, mocking its primitive treads, explosive shells and meager armor, not knowing the humans would soon rampage through their ranks, inside those outdated death traps, crushing the laughing lizards into a bloody pulp beneath 70 tons of furious steel. "As you can see," Pollux said, his forked tongue flickering, "the humans' crude combustion engines and chemical projectile weapons were no match for our sleek anti-gravity propulsion and plasma cannons, even centuries ago." The 7-foot-tall reptilian alien historian, with green scales and yellow eyes, strutted in front of 50 Yadaran military cadets. The cadets, each about 20 years old, and dressed in form-fitting black uniforms with red trim, snickered as they watched rotating holographic displays of the primitive war machines of mankind and other lesser species. Their tanks were ugly metal boxes dependent on wheels or treads, not elegant crafts that float on EM-field cushions like ours. And they still used explosive warheads. How quaint! The cadets howled with laughter at the absurd ancient devices. Suddenly alarms screeched through the lecture hall. The cadets' amusement turned to alertness as they snapped to attention. Commander Zorax burst into the room, his black uniform coat swirling. "The humans have refused to surrender," Zorax said grimly. "Our ultimatum for the colony on Kepler 186F has been met with defiance. The Emperor has ordered the immediate enslavement of its 10,000 human inhabitants." Pollux stepped forward eagerly. "Commander, I volunteer to accompany the invasion fleet as an observer. I am curious to see these primitives in combat." Zorax nodded. "Granted. The fleet of 100 ships departs within the hour, with 500 soldiers and 50 hover tanks each. We will crush this resistance and deliver the humans to the slave markets." As the Yadaran ships entered hyperspace, towards the remote world of Kepler 186F, a sense of unease crept over Pollux. He had mocked the humans' antiquated tanks and resolve, but a small, rare flicker of doubt entered his mind. What if they had underestimated these desperate creatures? What if the cornered humans unleashed those primitive weapons with the ferocity and cleverness of a species that had already conquered its own world? If the 10,000 humans could not repel the Yadarans, a life of whips and neural collars awaited them. That knowledge made humans very dangerous prey indeed. Pollux shook his head, trying to dismiss such ridiculous concerns. The barbarians in their fossil-fueled antiques could never withstand the might of the Yadaran Empire. This would be a slaughter, not a fight. The Yadaran armada tore out of hyperspace, 100 warships strong, led by the dreadnought YSS Invictus. Pollux stood on the bridge next to Commander Zorax, his heart pounding. Despite his earlier bravado, unease coiled in his stomach. "Begin the invasion! Deploy all landers and tanks!" Zorax barked. Dozens of dropships spewed from the fleet's belly, plummeting towards the blue-green world below. On Kepler 186F's surface, Craig Bennett rallied the colonists. The 45-year-old's grey hair was cropped short, a scar slicing down his left cheek. He had seen war before, and would see it again today. "Listen up! We've got 10,000 people here, 5,000 men, 5,000 women. I know you're scared, but we've prepared for this. Get to your positions, grab your weapons, strap on your armor. This is our home, and we're going to defend it." The crowd roared, faces grim yet determined. They dispersed to foxholes, trenches, and bunkers, armed with rifles, missiles, and a secret weapon. As Yadaran tanks hovered towards the colony, the ground trembled. From camouflaged hangars, 100 M11 Abrams tanks rolled forth, 120 Minitus cannons gleaming. Pollux gaped in disbelief. "Those primitives have tanks, and so many, how?" "A hidden stockpile for weapons testing," Zorax snarled. "No matter, they cannot win." The two armies clashed in the planet's dense forests and craggy badlands. Despite their anti-grav engines, the Yadaran tanks floundered on the rough terrain, unable to bring their weapons to bear. In contrast, the humans' tracked vehicles navigated the landscape with ease. Abrams tanks spat shell after shell, their heavy armor deflecting the aliens' energy beams. Explosions lit the battlefield as Ydaran craft burned and crumpled. "This is impossible," Pollux cried, watching the destruction through the flagship's monitors. "Mere chemical projectiles cannot defeat us." Zorax pounded a console, teeth bared. "Bombard the colony from orbit, wipe it off the face of the planet." But before the fleet could unleash its wrath, human strike fighters screamed from underground bunkers. Missiles and autocannons tore into the Ydaran ships, flames billowing from ruptured hulls. The Invictus shuddered as its shields failed. On the ground, Craig urged his tank into the enemy formation, cannon roaring. The Yadarans broke, fleeing in terror as the humans surged forward. Craig's voice crackled over the comm. "Drive them back to their ships, let none escape." As the aliens retreated in disarray, Pollux collapsed into a seat, mind reeling. The fundamental truths of Yadaran supremacy crumbled before his eyes. If the humans could bloody them so, did his people truly deserve to rule the galaxy? The Yadaran fleet fled Kepler 186F, jump drives flaring as the ships tore open reality, and escaped to hyperspace. Aboard the Invictus, Pollux clenched his fists, the bitter taste of defeat in his throat. How could this be? How could primitives in fossil-fueled antiques best the pride of the Yadaran armada? But even as despair gripped him, a cold realization settled in his chest. This was no fluke victory, no lucky strike. The humans had won through courage, tenacity, and tactical brilliance. And if they could triumph here, on this remote colony... Pollux turned to Zorax, jaw set. "Commander, this battle is over, but the war has only begun." Zorax hissed, eyes slitted with rage, but he did not argue. Across the stars on the Yadaran homeworld, panic erupted in the streets as news of the defeat spread like wildfire. Crowds surged through the cities, screaming in fear and anger. Rioters smashed windows and set fires, the normally ordered society collapsing into chaos. In the capital, the Yadaran High Council convened an emergency session. 12 ancient reptilians, scales dull with age, gathered around a circular table, ornate robes susurrating. At the head sat Zara, her eyes hard as flint. "This cannot stand," Zara declared, voice cold. "The humans have defied us, humiliated us. They must be crushed." The other councillors muttered agreement, nodding. Zara raised a clawed hand, silencing them. "I am ordering the full mobilization of our military. 10,000 ships, 5 million soldiers. We will drown the humans in our numbers and grind them to dust beneath our claws." As the Yadaran war machine rumbled to life, the humans on Kepler 186F celebrated their victory. In the ruins of the colony, Craig Bennett and his fellow survivors whooped and cheered, hugging each other fiercely. But even in the flush of triumph, Craig knew their fight was far from over. He strode to the colony's communications center, a cramped room filled with jury-rigged equipment. Craig flipped switches and turned dials, hailing Earth on a crackly, long-range channel. "This is Bennett on Kepler 186F, he said. "We've repelled the Yadaran invasion, but we need reinforcements and supplies ASAP. They'll be back, and in greater numbers." To Craig's shock, a response came swiftly. "Kepler 186F, this is Admiral Singh of the United Earth Federation. Well done, Bennett. We're dispatching a fleet to your location immediately. 500 ships with troops and tanks. ETA, 36 hours. Hang tight. We'll see you soon. Singh out." Craig slumped back in his chair, relief washing through him. The cavalry was coming. A day and a half later, cheers erupted across Kepler 186F as the UEF fleet emerged from hyperspace in a blaze of light. 500 sleek warships, bristling with guns and missile tubes, took up orbital positions. Dropships descended to the surface like metallic hail, disgorging thousands of soldiers in poured armor, weapons ready. One of the dropships landed near Craig's position. The ramp lowered with a hiss, and a bear of a man ducked out, a grin splitting his bearded face. Craig laughed in delight. "Jack Hawkins, you old warhorse, what are you doing here?" Jack, better known as Hammer to his troops, strode over and engulfed Craig in a spine-cracking hug. "Heard you could use a hand, Bennett. Besides, Been too long since we got in a tank together." The reunion was cut short by a klaxon's blare. Soldiers scrambled to battle stations, and a voice crackled over the comms. "Admiral Singh to all units. Yadaran fleet inbound. Thousands of ships. They must have been waiting in ambush. All strike craft and frigates form up. Assault teams prepare for ground attack." In space, the UEF and Yadaran fleets clashed like dueling thunderstorms. Beams of superheated plasma and clouds of missiles crisscrossed the void. Shields flared and hulls crumpled as the human and alien warships traded titanic blows. On the ground, Hammer led a battalion of M1A5 Abrams tanks, the latest evolution of the venerable war machine, in a lightning raid on a Yadaran staging base. The tanks charged across the rocky terrain, turbine engines howling. Their electro-reactive armor shimmered, shrugging off enemy fire. As Hammer's tank platoon crested a ridge, they beheld a vast alien encampment below, swarming with soldiers and vehicles. Hammer grinned savagely and activated the comms. "All units, weapons free, light 'em up." 100 120mm railguns spoke as one, hurling hypersonic slugs at the Yadaran positions. Alien tanks exploded into fireballs, the shockwaves scattering infantry like leaves. Hammer's tank surged down the hill, Craig's Abrams right beside him, the two old friends once more united in battle. From a fortified bunker, Pollux could only watch in numb horror as the human tanks tore through the Yadaran lines like claws through flesh. The speed, the coordination, the sheer ferocity. It was unlike anything he had seen the Yadarans display. And in that moment, a treacherous thought entered Pollux's mind, one that shook him to his core. What if the Yadarans were wrong? What if their belief in their own superiority, their right to dominate lesser species, was nothing but arrogance and folly? What if the true path to greatness lay not in subjugation, but in cooperation? Pollux trembled, the battle forgotten as a lifetime of certainties crumbled to dust. He had much to ponder and much to atone for if he ever hoped to find redemption. Outside, the armies clashed, two species locked in an existential struggle, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. As the battle raged on Kepler 186's surface and in the void of space, a new horror emerged from the depths of the galaxy. A gargantuan Yadaran space station, a spherical monstrosity the size of a small moon, dropped out of hyperspace near the embattled planet. The Yadaran Doomsday device had arrived, a planet killer armed with an unfathomably powerful laser. On the station's bridge stood Admiral Thanos, Zorax's father. The towering reptilian's jet-black scales glittered in the dim light, his red eyes burning with malice. Thanos gazed at the holographic display of Kepler 186F with a cruel smile. "Attention humans and Yadarans alike," Thanos broadcast, his deep voice booming across every comm channel. "I am Admiral Thanos, commander of the Yadaran Doomsday device. Your pitiful battle ends now. This station will obliterate Kepler 186F and the human fleet as a demonstration of Yadaran supremacy. Let this be a warning to all who would defy us." Aboard the Invictus, Pollux felt his blood run cold at Thanos' words. The historian knew the terrifying power the YDD possessed, a power that could snuff out billions of lives in an instant. In that moment, Pollux made a fateful choice. He could no longer stand by and watch his people commit such atrocities. Pollux raced to the Invictus hangar bay, his heart pounding. He swiftly hijacked a Yadaran fighter, his clawed fingers dancing over the controls. With a roar of engines, Pollux blasted out of the hangar and aimed his craft towards the human fleet. "Human forces, this is Pollux of the Yadaran Empire," the historian broadcast desperately. "The Yadaran Doomsday device is preparing to fire on Kepler 187. You must stop it at all costs." On the planet's surface, Craig Bennett and Jack Hawkins received Pollux's warning with grim expressions. They knew that if the YDD fired its laser, everything they had fought for would be lost in an instant. "Damn it, we can't let that thing wipe us out," Hawkins growled, slamming a fist against his tank's console. Bennett nodded grimly. We need to take that station out before it can fire. It's our only chance. Quickly, the two veterans assembled a strike team of their most skilled tank crews and pilots. 10 M1A5 Abrams tanks, the pride of the human armored forces, rumbled into formation alongside 20 strike fighters. Pollux, having defected to the human side, volunteered to guide the team through the YDD's defenses. "I know that station inside and out," the historian said, his yellow eyes hard with determination. "I can get us to the reactor core. We destroy that, and the whole thing goes up in flames." As the strike team blasted off from Kepler 186F's surface, they used the YDD's own bulk to mask their approach, the tiny craft dwarfed by the immense station. They slipped through the energy shields and into one of the docking bays, the tanks and fighters touching down with barely a sound. But stealth could only take them so far. As soon as the team emerged into the station's main corridors, alarms blared and Yadaran soldiers swarmed to meet them. The Abrams tanks roared into action, their 120mm railguns spitting superheated slugs that tore through the defenders like a seethe through wheat. Pollux, riding in Bennett's tank, guided the team towards the YDD's heart. "Left at the next junction," the historian barked. "The reactor core is 3 levels down." The strike team blasted their way through bulkhead after bulkhead, the tank's electro-reactive armor shrugging off the Yadaran's return fire. Hawkins spearheaded the charge, his Abrams crushing alien bodies beneath its treads, its gun never falling silent. As they neared the reactor core, a massive blast door rumbled open and a towering figure stepped through. Admiral Thanos stood before them, a massive energy scythe crackling in his claws. "Foolish primates," Thanos snarled. "You dare challenge me on my own station? I will flay the flesh from your bones." Thanos lunged at Bennett's tank with blinding speed, his scythe carving a molten gouge in the Abrams armor. Bennett cursed and kicked open the hatch, leaping out to face the Yadaran admiral in single combat. The human and the reptilian clashed in a whirlwind of steel and plasma, Bennett's power sword meeting Thanos' scythe in a blaze of sparks. Around them, Hawkins and the other tank crews pushed on towards the reactor core, smashing through the last of the Yadaran defenses. Hawkins' tank skidded to a halt before the towering reactor, its armored sides glowing with waste heat. The grizzled veteran and his crew leapt out, planting demo charges at key structural points. Back at the blast door, Thanos pressed his attack, hammering at Bennett with bone-shattering blows. Bennett staggered, his sword wavering as the Admiral bore down on him. Suddenly, a barrage of plasma bolts slammed into Thanos' back, sending the Yadaran stumbling. Pollux swooped overhead in his stolen fighter, guns blazing. "Bennett now!" Pollux shouted. Seizing the opening, Bennett lunged forward and plunged his sword into Thanos' chest. The Admiral let out a gurgling roar and collapsed, black blood pooling around him. "The charges are set," Hawkins yelled over the comm. "Everybody get the hell out of here!" The strike team raced back to their ships, piling into the tanks and fighters with desperate speed. The YDD shuddered around them, the demo charges ripping through the reactor's containment fields. Bennett's tank was the last to reach the hangar, Pollux's fighter screaming alongside it. They leapt aboard their craft just as a massive explosion bloomed at the station's core, a miniature sun erupting to life. The tanks and fighters blasted out of the hangar with all the speed they could muster, rocketing away from the doomed station. Behind them, the YDD shattered like a colossal grenade, a spherical fireball consuming the station and everything within 100 kilometers. Kepler 186F and the human fleet disappeared in the glare, the blinding flash washing out all other light. The shockwaves slammed into the fleeing strike team, sending their craft tumbling end over end. When the blast faded, only drifting wreckage and glittering dust remained where the Yadaran doomsday device had once been. The strike team's ships limped back towards Kepler 186F, battered but unbowed. Fair aboard his fighter, Pollux felt a strange mix of elation and sorrow. He had betrayed his own people to aid the humans, but in doing so, he knew he had chosen the path of righteousness, the path of honor. As the strike team descended through the planet's atmosphere, Pollux saw the human and Yadaran fleet still locked in battle, the two sides hammering at each other with desperate fury. The YDD was gone, but the war still raged on. Pollux turned his fighter towards the nearest Yadaran warship, weapons hot. He had made his choice, and he would see it through to the bitter end, even if it cost him everything. As the twisted wreckage of the Yadaran doomsday device drifted through the void, the battered human fleet and their Yadaran allies regrouped in orbit over Kepler 186F. Craig Bennett slumped in the command chair of his tank, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. He watched on the view screens as the remnants of the Yadaran armada, now leaderless and demoralized, turned tail and fled into the depths of space. "We did it, Craig," Jack Hawkins said, his voice crackling over the comm. "We actually did it." Craig managed a weary smile. "Yeah, we did. But the cost—" He trailed off, his thoughts turning to the brave men and women who had given their lives in the battle. Friends, comrades, brothers and sisters in arms, all gone, their lives snuffed out in the cold vacuum of space or on the blood-soaked soil of Kepler 186F. Pollux, still sitting in the co-pilot seat of Craig's tank, looked out at the celebrating human soldiers with a mixture of awe and sorrow. He had betrayed his own people, turned his back on everything he had ever known, to fight alongside these incredible beings. And now, with the battle won, he realized that he could never go back. He was a traitor, a pariah, an outcast among his own kind. But as he watched Craig and Jack climb out of their tanks, embracing each other with the fierce camaraderie of soldiers who had faced death together, Pollux knew that he had made the right choice. These humans, these brave, stubborn, indomitable creatures, had shown him what true strength and courage looked like, and he would stand with them no matter the cost. A few days later, as the smoke of battle finally cleared and the survivors began to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, Craig and Jack gathered the remaining soldiers and colonists for a solemn ceremony. They stood in the shadow of their battered tanks, the once gleaming armor now scorched and dented from the ferocious fighting. As the names of the fallen were read out one by one, the tanks fired their guns in a 21-round salute. The booming reports echoed across the barren landscape, a final tribute to the brave souls who had given everything in defense of their home. Pollux stood among the human soldiers, his head bowed in respect. He had never felt such a sense of belonging, of shared purpose and camaraderie as he did at that moment. These humans had accepted him, fought beside him, trusted him with their lives. And he knew with a certainty that went beyond words that he would do the same for them. As the ceremony drew to a close, a UEF admiral approached Craig and Jack, his face grave. "The Yadarans have agreed to a temporary ceasefire," he said. "They're trying to save face, regroup and lick their wounds. But make no mistake, this war is far from over. They'll be back, and in greater numbers." Craig nodded, his jaw tight. He turned to his fellow soldiers, his voice ringing out across the assembled ranks. "We've faced the worst the Yadarans could throw at us, and we're still standing," he said. "We've proven that we're stronger than they ever imagined, that we'll never back down, never surrender, no matter the odds." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the sea of determined faces. "But the Admiral is right. The war isn't over. The Yadarans will come back, and when they do, we'll be ready. We'll fight them on the ground, in the skies, in the very depths of space if we have to. Because this is our home, our way of life, and we'll defend it to our last breath." As the sun began to set over the war-torn landscape of Kepler 186F, the surviving tanks rolled out to take up defensive positions, their engines rumbling with grim purpose. Pollux climbed atop one of the Abrams, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He knew, with a sense of unshakable certainty, that he had finally found his true calling, not as a historian, not as a Yadaran, but as a warrior, fighting alongside the most formidable beings in the galaxy, the humans who had shown him the true meaning of courage, sacrifice, and unbreakable spirit. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.